The signing into law of the amended National Land Transport Act 5 of 2009 finally paves the way for e-hailing service operators to apply for operating licenses like any other public transport operator. Transport Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga has commended the signing. Joining us to discuss this further is Private Public Transport Association Chair Vhatuka Mbelengwa, Santaco spokesperson Phala, as well as National Taxi Alliance spokesperson Theo Malele. Good evening to the three of you. Welcome to Full View. Let's start with you, perhaps, Vhatuka. You have advocated for the rights of e-hailing operators to work in the transport space without any hindrance for the longest time. We've had many interactions, you and I. What does the signing of this bill mean for the e-hailing operators?
Well, I think firstly, it's a step in the right direction, but it's a slow step indeed. It's as you say, the Act of 2009, and I think transportation has evolved so much since then, and we keep evolving, and it's important for us to emerge with an agile lawmaking system. But speaking to the laws directly, I think we are waiting to see the regulations. The regulations will really then ensure whether the bill will be impactful or not. And we'd like to see that app companies will be held to account. We'd like to see an intentional commitment to ensure that local apps can emerge within the regulations.
Remind us of just some of the grievances you had with the app companies, because consistently when we speak, you do want them for there to be greater accountability when it comes to them. For the longest time, you felt that they were a law unto themselves. Just remind the viewers who perhaps don't know the issues that even the e-hailing operators have had with these app owners.
And at the core of it is that most of the disputes you find that emerge within e-hailing stem from an unregulated or undefined relationship with app companies, and they therefore are undermining industry. Remember, the intent is for us to emerge with a healthy ecosystem within transport where we can complement each other and compete with each other within a healthy space, and not undermine industry. So the battles will be fought by us within the street, but ultimately it's the likes of Uber and Bolt that are undermining industry by not deploying proper pricing determining instruments. And we hope within the regulatory framework there will be a price setting instrument that all parties must adhere to, because this will then level the playing field.
So the devil will be in that detail. Rebecca, your views on just the strengthening of regulations of the sector of e-hailing?
Looking forward, I think it's better late than never. It's taken 13 years for us to get here. Concerningly, though, as far as August last year, the National Department of Transport was still consulting with some of us, inclusive of operators from Vhatuka's space of e-hailing, in terms of determining what the regulations should look like. And so if you're signing this bill into an act of law, and yet there's not much clarity as yet in terms of when the regulations will come into being, we're just happy that there is some progress. But look, it's taking too long. And unfortunately, the burn is being felt by people on the ground. So much unfortunate engagements that have been experienced on the ground because of the confusion that's been caused, and the delays are only making things worse.
Theo, you're among those that have felt that the introduction of e-hailing has been somewhat problematic and has led to the many problems, be it the conflict among public taxi operators and the e-hailing industry. Just your views on just this moment of the signing of the bill.
Yes, there have been. Well, good evening to you and the colleagues out there and the viewers at home. We've had a cocktail of challenges with us. But perhaps, I would like, what actually amazed one was the fact that e-hailers came into play when the taxi industry was given operating licenses to operate within specific geographic areas. And yet this, so-called at the time, disruptive system just came in, and people were just working nilly-willy without taking any, consideration of other people within the same space. And this, to me, I was wondering if we still had a government at the time, but we are hopeful that perhaps this, would change, because we saw these guys, being a law basically unto themselves by virtue of offloading and loading near taxi ranks. And there's also been even pirate vehicles because we couldn't even make up as to who is who in the zoo, because you also had touts at the shopping centers who would actually go and look for passengers, and they would take them into different sedans. So you wouldn't know precisely what the issues were there. So we're quite happy that this now there will be some form of semblance, whereas we should be able to have regulations that would properly control the e-hailing sector and ensure that the safety of passengers is guaranteed. We live in South Africa. This is home, and we have to ensure that we will secure the public transport space as our market and as our livelihood, and we will beg government to also come to play.
Theo,
Yeah.
with the benefit of hindsight, would you entirely blame government for how it's managed this process? Because some could argue that, it's an industry that was fairly new, but really what we saw here was the public transport industry evolving itself. So government was now playing catch up itself and trying to navigate the space, and now they're finally looking to regulate. But would you still place the blame on them and say they should have been proactive?
Yes, where was government? Because these vehicles were taking even officials, almost every South African of note has been, knows about this mode. And they know that it has been in existence. Why couldn't they make the necessary follow-ups to find out as to who exactly these people are? I suspect that, some politicians' hands are in the cookie jar.
Theo? Or perhaps let's actually move it to Vhatuka. Your views on just what Theo is saying there, that perhaps here we can place the blame on government that they were not quick enough to act immediately when we had e-hailing. We should have seen them spring to action and try to regularize this specific industry.
I think government has had a decade, and we know they've had a decade because we've been at the front lines for the past decade of saying to government, you need to step in. So it's one thing to be caught sleeping, but it's another thing to take over 10 years to react, and another thing to take 13 years to sign in a bill. So when you then take into consideration the vast public outcry and the lack of response, the vast investment, domestic investment, and the lack of response, and the vast amount of violence and the lack of response, therefore we do have a case to hold government to account.
But even as e-hailing operators, it seemed they were still finding their feet and the relationship with the owners of these apps themselves. So can you still blame government all that much? Because it's been a long process for the operators themselves. You've gone from a situation of saying we are not employees, we are partners, but some of them wanted to be viewed as employees with rights. There was around the billing system thereof. So wouldn't you say that these were teething problems, as some might even think?
No, they can't be teething problems because I'm a South African child, and every company and every business is subject to South African laws. Now, Uber and Bolt are not being held to those laws, and it's my government that has the authority to do so. So it's not a teething problem when you've got vast amounts of people who are dying. It's not a teething problem when you've got billions of domestic investment. And we're saying protect our own efforts, because this investment is not to enrich them. It's to better our own lives. It's our own cars, it's our own petrol, it's our own skill sets. So it's more than a teething problem, it's exploitation, and we need to confront it as that.
And then when the regulations eventually come, what if some of the other important issues that you've had with the app owners, what if they're not addressed there? Because among them was, particularly for Bolt drivers, they had an issue with the number of discounts, that you would be transporting specific clients, but you would find a situation where there are discounts that the client is getting, you're not getting the money back from Bolt, but beyond that there were also safety issues and the inability to reach Bolt.
The bill seeks to regulate industry and not just e-hailing. So industry and all its participants. So if your Bolts and Ubers don't want to form part of a healthy industry, as industry and as Santaco needs to stand and act as an apex body and give way to organizations that don't want to form part of a healthy ecosystem. And our government needs to show its strength and say, it's either you're going to behave within our country or you are not. But beyond the regulation we need just for the new transportation system, we need a regulatory framework for how tech should be governed within this country, and how tech companies and tech solutions that are being deployed should then behave within this country, and we should be able to see tangible economic benefit to the people of South Africa.
Rebecca, now among the bill's roles, it will be to enhance the role of provinces and municipalities in public transport service contracts and expand the minister's powers to implement regulations. Just your final take on that and the broadened role.
Look, there's a big loophole in terms of regulation of public transport generally in this country. We've got a big problem of piracy, even in the minibus industry. That's one of the reasons why the industry has been so concerned to say, why are you agreeing for other players to come into the picture if you're struggling to work with what is already in the status quo? So we're hoping that the introduction of more powers to the minister and the provincial regulatory entities, one, will be reasonable. They need to be reasonable. There have been a lot of platforms that have been established inclusive of the tribunals, but we don't often see them to be very effective. One of the biggest things we need them to do is to consult the industry. Speak to us as the operators on the ground and hear what needs to be done so that we don't find ourselves always at loggerheads.
All right, so greater consultation. Thank you very much to the three of you. That's Private Public Transport Association Chair Vhatuka Mbelengwa, Santaco spokesperson Rebecca Phala there, as well as National Taxi Alliance spokesperson Theo Malele.